Adelaide Vincent, the Witch of Fulchester, is accused of the manslaughter of Charles Laker. It is alleged that, being the maiden of a witchcraft coven, she did curse his life, thereby bringing about conditions that directly or indirectly led to his death. Anne Silk, a coven member and assistant to Miss Vincent, has testified that Charles Laker's betrayal of the coven to a journalist, Terry Saxon, was justified, since the sex orgies which he maintained took place at Grand Sabbats actually did occur, the women of the coven being forced to participate in them. Adelaide Vincent, for her part, has denied any such sex orgies ever took place. She's further said that she practices as a witch only for the money it brings her, and does not for a moment believe in her own supposed powers. This denial has had a most extreme effect on Anne Silk.
I wish to make it quite clear that I will not tolerate hysterical behaviour during this trial. If Miss Silk is unwell, she will receive medical attention. For the rest, I must ask the jury to disregard this interruption as unwarranted. Thank you, Mr. Lotterby. You may continue.
Thank you, my lord. So, Miss Vincent, these sex orgies simply never took place?
No, the whole idea is preposterous.
Sex has absolutely nothing to do with your ceremonials.
Well, you have to remember that the whole basis of nature religion, and that's all that witchcraft is response to the forces around you. The earth, the sun and the stars, and so forth. Well, there are forces within one, too, powerful ones. One of these is sex.
Are you saying, then, that at your ceremonial, certain individuals might perhaps choose to seek sexual experience on their own account, and you wouldn't prevent them from doing so?
That is exactly the way to put it. Mind you, would expect them to observe a certain discretion about what they were doing. Sex in public is no part of witchcraft activities. That's why it's ridiculous to talk of orgies.
But Anne Silk testified to them quite categorically, Miss Vincent, and Charles Laker contacted a journalist to make the fact of them public.
I have known of Anne Silk's jealousy of me for some time. She does want to take over the coven, and that is why she lies. Charles Laker thought that by practicing witchcraft he would improve his business or something, that he'd suddenly find himself wealthy.
Now, what did he find?
He found himself poorer by the amount of his admission fee, without even the opportunity of being able to recoup his losses. So then he began to take against those things he particularly disliked, most obviously the nudism.
Nudism?
Well, nakedness is an essential part of witchcraft ceremonial. It signifies surrender to nature. You start the Sabbat clothed, but later on disrobe.
And Charles Laker was offended by this?
He was horrified by it. He really was a most repressed little man. But something happened then that can only be described as the most appalling luck. A member of the coven offered him sex.
Offered him sex? What was the outcome of that?
Well, Charles ran screaming to the nearest newspaper to hold a scandal for him. You see, not only was he offered sex, which shocked him, but he was offered it for money.
You're saying one of the assistants in your coven, suggested that Charles Laker should enjoy her favours and that he should pay her for them. Is that usual?
Well, no, far from it. I was astounded when I heard. I had no idea we had anything like that going on in our midst. Well, apparently, there had been other instances. And the whore in question was Anne Silk.
My lord, I object. Even if this accusation were true, which I have every reason to doubt, it is surely nothing to do with this case.
On the contrary, my lord, it is entirely relevant. It will show that Miss Anne Silk had an additional motive for fabricating her story of sex orgies, that of covering up her own private activities.
But Charles Laker told the journalist Terry Saxon of these orgies quite independently, Mr. Lotterby.
But Charles put it like that to Saxon because he was emotionally upset at the time, my lord. And then Anne Silk took up the cry to get at me.
I see. I'm anxious to avoid a situation, Miss Vincent, in which the court has to trust either your word or that of Miss Silk. Now, Mr. Lotterby, am I to take it that, like the prosecution, you've been unable to find any other members of the coven to come forward and give their evidence?
The cloak of anonymity has proved impossible to penetrate, my lord.
But I must say once again that I find it very difficult to believe that Miss Vincent couldn't know the identities of the members of a circle of which she is the leader.
Miss Vincent, perhaps you could speak to his lordship's point.
From the beginning with me, people are known only by pseudonyms. The object of that is precisely to avoid the possibility of public confrontation, such as this trial. People still have some odd ideas about witchcraft. I can't run the risk of betraying my members. I didn't know Charles Laker as Charles Laker till all this began, and Anne Silk has always been Demeter to me, nothing more.
So Charles Laker was simply hysterical in speaking to Terry Saxon of sex orgies at the Grand Sabbaths.
Yes.
And he was brought to this state of mind by what can only be called soliciting on the part of Anne Silk.
Yes.
No, it lies!
Miss Silk, I must impress on you that the court cannot be responsible for you. I mean, if you insist on remaining when you are obviously not well, that's your own business. But there will be no more interjections. Now, is that understood?
On the night of November the 1st, Miss Vincent, did you conduct a certain ceremony at your home?
Yes. I conducted a ceremony whereby I cursed the life of Charles Laker for betraying the coven. I was assisted by Anne Silk.
Yes, this must have been for you a quite meaningless ceremony.
Oh, yes, it was. But it was necessary that the coven should know it had been done. Of course, I didn't for a moment imagine it could possibly do him any harm. It was quite extraordinary what happened. I couldn't believe it when I heard.
Thank you, Miss Vincent. No further questions.
So, Miss Vincent, you are a practicing witch who doesn't believe a single article of the witch's creed.
So to say, yes.
You think it's all nonsense and wishful thinking, and you only bother with it because it happens to make you a lot of money.
Yes.
And it does make you a lot of money, doesn't it? Or rather, it did until today.
I'm sorry.
Well, as a result of your fearless confession here in court, you can hardly return to being maiden of the coven, can you? Your honesty will have had the effect of cutting you off without a penny.
I am on oath to tell the truth here, I believe. Is not that the priority?
Ah, capital sentiments, Miss Vincent, capital sentiments. But let's talk about that income that you've sacrificed. Very substantial, £200 to £1,000 joining fee. Up to £5 for a minor festival and 20 for a Sabbath, and all this for nothing whatsoever in return.
Well, not nothing, no. I went through all the forms conscientiously, and I conducted all the ceremonies.
Yes, but you created no genuine effects, did you? You tell us you made no real magic.
No, that's true.
Absolutely no end to human gullibility, is there? A touch of amateur conjuring here, you assure us, a smattering of astrology there. Just what were people paying these huge sums of money for? Haven't you rather understated the role of sex in witchcraft, Miss Vincent?
No.
It's really little more than dancing naked around an open fire like a lot of abandoned girl guides. Oh, apart from a few private arrangements on the side who concern no one but the couples involved.
Well, that's how it is, however you try to garble it. We're not afraid of sex. We don't make it the be-all and end-all.
So Anne Silk is lying.
Yes, of course she is, to discredit me.
And Charles Laker was making everything up, talking out of a crippling repression.
Yes.
But all the literature on witchcraft throughout the ages has stressed the importance of sex in the ceremonials, Miss Vincent. You don't deny that, surely?
Most of the literature on witchcraft since the Middle Ages is completely biased. Do you know what the witch has been in European society? The scapegoat. So-called respectable people have always had their little bits of sex on the side, but society considered it evil. Therefore, a victim had to be found, someone on whom the rest could heap all their sins, the witch.
An interesting theory.
The sorry truth.
Have you ever had sex with any of the male members of your coven at a Sabbath, Miss Vincent?
I'm not going to answer that kind of question.
Well, your refusal may be taken as assent.
It comes out of a sick mind.
Only the men in your coven, it seems, pay. The women are all assistants. Girls of the house might be a better interpretation. Set a splendid example by the madam.
My lord, these inferences are entirely unjustified.
Not necessarily. I think we see the true picture now. Miss Vincent controls what might be described as an esoteric brothel, where, under the cloak of natural religion, men who are so disposed can come and experience the delights of group sex. And that is what they pay the astronomical fees for, and that is why none of them can be found to give evidence today. And that is why Charles Laker was cursed, because he knew the truth and was about to tell it.
My lord, is counsel for the prosecution to be allowed to make speeches to the court like this?
Well, Mr. Lotterby, while being grateful to you for being reminded of the rules of evidence, I must say, on balance, I think Miss Vincent should answer that.
My sex life is my own business. I don't sell myself, but obviously I take lovers if and when it pleases me. As to the rest, it's absurd. I discovered Anne Silk was taking money for sex, and I was deeply shocked. Nothing like that had happened in our coven before. Never.
Very well, Miss Vincent. Let's come to the cursing ceremony of Charles Laker. You've testified this was a meaningless ceremony for you, quite without significance.
Yes.
And that the last thing you expected was that anything would have an effect.
The last thing.
Yet that can hardly be the truth, can it, Miss Vincent? For even if you didn't believe in your powers in the matter, you surely did know how susceptible Charles Laker was. Terry Saxon has told us how he saw Laker at your knees, on his knees, begging you not to curse him. And you'd only threatened to do so then.
Well, I can't help that. It had to be gone through with. What people choose to do to themselves is no concern of mine.
To do to themselves?
Yes, to themselves. Charles Laker. Saxon was cursed too, wasn't he? It didn't affect him.
Ah, but you knew full well it wouldn't get the same effect there. Did you not curse Terry Saxon in order to detract from the attention you knew the effect would have on Laker?
What does that mean?
Well, have you ever heard of something called transfer hypnosis, Miss Vincent?
No, I haven't.
Come, it's your stock in trade. Isn't it the suggested scientific basis as such curses as actually have the effect?
Curses never have an effect.
Well, Father Garmondsway seems to think they do, and he's had wide experience in the field. Of course, you do have to have the right subject, one sympathetic to hypnosis in general, but then you have told us that people found you a very formidable female. Charles Laker particularly, perhaps?
Well, that's absurd. And even if it were true, it's nothing to do with me. I simply went through the motions at the cursing ceremony.
No curse of yours has ever had any effect in the past?
No.
You yourself earlier drew attention to the fact that you were on oath, Miss Vincent. Will you now formally swear, before whatever gods you hold sacred, that you have told no lie here today?
Your name is Daniel Rocco, and you are a medical practitioner living at 24A Argyle Court, London.
I am.
Were you at one time a conjure man, a priest of the voodoo cult?
I was. In my youth in Jamaica, I was much attracted to the idea of magic. I studied with a famous practitioner. His name was Jimbo Baines. And after a while, I began to see the stupidity of what I was doing. Old Jimbo was a complete fraud. I turned to medicine. I've written a number of papers on demonic possession, cursing, spells, trances, and so forth, which has been published in scientific journals in England and the United States.
I see. Well, we should be concerned here only with cursing, Dr. Rocco. Now, can you tell us, please, in your view, does cursing actually produce an effect?
Well, something produces any effect, but it certainly isn't the cursing.
Certainly isn't.
No. I've seen healthy men lie down and die, all because they believe some fool of a witch doctor has put a death curse on them. There was one case. It was what finally turned me from voodoo. Of an old woman in a village who had received a message that her husband, who was separated from her, had put a death curse on her. She died. There was nothing anyone could do. Then it was discovered that the fellow who had brought the message had got the name wrong. There was another old woman also estranged from her husband who had been cursed. But the first one died anyway.
I see. Did this event lead you to any conclusions about cursing, Doctor?
Together with some other instances, yes. It became to me clear that the motive power for the operation of the curse comes from within the subject, not from anything outside, strictly from its inside. Personal dreads, fears, worries, etc.
In other words, death is brought about psychosomatically.
Positively, in every case.
Is this the same thing as what is called transfer hypnosis?
Oh, no. For transfer hypnosis, there must be an agent. I am saying there doesn't really need to be any agent at all. It isn't even necessary for the witch doctor to pronounce the curse, only for the subject to believe he has pronounced it. Anyway, how is it possible to bring about death by hypnotic means if I hypnotize you? I can't make you do anything you wouldn't do in your normal state. I can't make you rob a bank unless you're a natural-born bank robber, so how can I make you die? Most people don't want to die, do they? It doesn't make sense, is all. Well, mumbo-jumbo.
These personal dreads, fears, and worries you speak of as causing the subject to fall ill, Doctor, now, are these of a particular nature?
Yes, there are invariably dreads and fears of the world unseen, the spirit world. But if you don't believe in the spirit world, then it's pretty hard for you to be affected by cursing.
Well, it's been suggested to this court that a spirit world does in fact exist, and that there is even such a being as the devil.
Well, when it comes to spirits, I take mine in a glass with a little soda. But old Jimbo Baines is a record. He had conjured up the devil from time to time. It's funny, but I just couldn't seem to see him.
Thank you, Doctor. That's all.
Dr. Rocco, not all medical men, or men who have studied black magic, seem to share your contempt for the world of spirits, do they?
Well, what people believe or don't believe, it's no concern of mine.
My meaning is that you can't brush away soberly held views by making fun of them. However, considering your notions on the mechanics of cursing, if it's true, as you suggest, that a person activates it all himself, then why does the agent bother to pronounce the curse at all? Why does he not just pass the word around that he has done so?
But in the majority of cases, the agent does believe he's responsible, you see. That's the complication.
And if he believes he's responsible, he is responsible.
I'm sorry?
Well, surely whatever it is that is activated it is activated from an understanding received from outside. One simply doesn't wake up one morning and find that a death wish is taking over. One has to be under the impression that one has been cursed.
Of course.
And isn't that really the same thing as transfer hypnosis, Doctor? The agent is quite truly bending the subject to his will by merely letting him know he's been cursed.
But how about the case I quoted where the wrong person got the message he'd been cursed? The right one didn't die later, you know, when the error had been discovered. So the transfer hypnosis takes an odd direction there.
Precisely, Dr. Rocco, but then did not the woman who believed she'd been cursed actually die?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor, that's all.
No re-examination, my lord.
You may leave the witness box, Dr. Rocco.
That concludes the case for the defense, my lord.
Learned counsel, before we proceed to the summing up, there are one or two matters on which I am not completely satisfied. One of the cornerstones of the defense's case is that the witness Anne Silk is accused of offering herself for money to members of the coven. Now, this was not put to her during her cross-examination. Therefore, I'd like to put that to Miss Silk now. I do not feel satisfied that the jury has all the evidence available to them for making a decision. Miss Silk, you will re-enter the witness box. Miss Silk, I repeat, I am ready to call an adjournment if you feel you should seek medical aid again.
A doctor can do no good.
Well, now, Miss Silk, I have particularly to ask you whether there is any part of your previous testimony which you would like to change. And remember, you are still on oath.
No, I want to change nothing.
You still say, do you, that the Grand Sabbaths were in fact sexual orgies into which the women were forced to enter by Miss Vincent?
Yes.
And you say this under oath?
Yes.
Now, as to the testimony of Miss Vincent that in fact at the Sabbaths you offered sexual favors to various males present, including Charles Laker, and demanded money for the same.
It's a lie.
You have never, as a member of the coven, indulged in any form of prostitution?
No.
Thank you. You may leave the witness box.
Members of the jury, there is only one real question to ask yourselves today, and that is Adelaide Vincent responsible for the death of Charles Laker? I submit that the answer to this question is yes. You may think, perhaps, that Adelaide Vincent genuinely is a witch with remarkable powers who put a curse on Charles Laker and he sickened and died. In that case, you have no problem. But you may be in doubts about the reality of witches and evil spirits. In this case, I ask you to remember that Charles Laker does not seem to have shared your doubts. And Adelaide Vincent knew this and calculatedly played on his doubts and fears. This amounts to responsibility for his death, ladies and gentlemen. This amounts to manslaughter. I ask you to find the defendant guilty as charged.
My lord, members of the jury, fortunately, we don't live in the 16th century. The name of our city is not Salem, and we don't hold court under the Witchfinder General. So we won't waste time weighing up imponderables. There are no true witches. There are no effective curses. All that is superstition, pure and simple. There is, however, autosuggestion. Now, you have heard how it is possible for persons of a certain type to kill themselves out of an excessive sense of dread. Now, perhaps this is what happened to Charles Laker. Perhaps he believed he was cursed and died as a result. Perhaps. The prosecution certainly has not proved that this happened. And even if it had, it wouldn't affect my client, because Adelaide Vincent is a self-confessed charlatan. She had no reason to believe that Charles Laker could have been affected in any way at all by her ridiculous curse. Now, it seems, members of the jury, that Miss Anne Silk would have you believe that she is, at this moment, suffering from a malevolent spell placed on her by the defendant. Well, I'm sure you will treat this performance by a part-time actress with the contempt it deserves. Ladies and gentlemen, you have no alternative but to find Adelaide Vincent not guilty.
Members of the jury, now falls to me to direct you as to the law in this case. First, I must remind you that the prosecution must prove their case beyond reasonable doubt, and if they fail to do that, then you must bring in a verdict of not guilty. Now, the central issues in this case of manslaughter are as follows. First and foremost, and most importantly, the prosecution must show that the defendant caused the death of Charles Laker. Now, it's for you to decide what caused his condition at the time of death. Whether, as the defense suggests, it was something which came purely from inside him, or whether, as the prosecution suggests, Miss Vincent does indeed possess these maleficent powers of which we've heard so much during this case. But even if you are satisfied of that, you must also be satisfied that when she, as she has confessed, cursed his life, she knew that what she was doing might or could cause his death. Now, if, on the other hand, you accept her statement that the spell was nothing more than a harmless, meaningless ceremony, well, then you must bring in a verdict of not guilty. Now, as to the evidence of Miss Silk, I must direct you to ignore her accusation that she is being cursed by Miss Vincent. You will now retire, please, and consider your verdict.
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the accused Adelaide Vincent guilty or not guilty of manslaughter?
Not guilty.
Next week, a chance for you to join another jury when our cameras return to the Crown Court.